We've been walking through a series entitled Honor. And we've been looking at how we can honor up, down, and all around. We've looked at honoring up, how we honor God. And last week we began to look at honoring down, honoring one another. And last week, the main idea was this: honoring those who have paved the way. And so we began last week by learning how we honor those who have gone before us, those who have blazed the trail. They've paved the way for us. And many times we don't take time to honor those. And the two people that we mentioned about last week were this. We need to honor our parents and our elders. And there are ways to honor people without actually, honoring them for who they're not. Okay? Like many times we think like, I can't honor that person because of this reason. There are ways we can honor people without, completely agreeing with everything they do. We can honor them. And so when we think of honoring our parents, when we think of honoring our elders, those who are older than us, there are ways we can do that. Even if sometimes you feel like, I can't honor this person. And there are many reasons why, we grew up maybe in an abusive home. Things have happened. It can be hard to actually think through, like, how do I honor this person? But there are ways to just honor them, that they brought you into the world. We're not saying that you have to listen and obey them when they're telling you to steal or do all kinds of wrong. But there are ways to honor them for who they are, as far as being your parents or just someone older in your life. They've gone before. And many times, we see as people get older, sometimes they get a little more finicky or they get a little more agitated. I remember someone was telling me a story about an older person, just really gruff and, always had somewhat like a bad attitude. But they said if you actually would listen, he had a lot of good things to say. It just was, he came across really gruff, like he was this, depressed old guy, everything's wrong. But he had a lot of good to say. But many times, we don't take time to listen. Growing up, I think of being a kid and my grandparents. You didn't always want to listen to your grandparents when they would sit down and tell you stories about walking to school uphill both ways, in 2 foot of snow, and you were just like, what? How did the hill change? How does that work? Did you go home a different way? But there was wisdom there if we would just sit and listen, if we would ask questions and gain perspective. And so just looking at that, there were a few things I said, what we can do, how we can honor. We can guard our words and our tone when we're talking to our elders and our parents. Stand up in their presence. Nothing says, speaks of honor than when they come in and you kind of stand up and you give them a handshake. Nothing screams more than when you see somebody like this and you walk in, you see older people walk in the room and they're like, oh, hey. But when someone's like, oh, hey, good to see you, and they stand up, acknowledge you're there, then sit back down, hey, that means a lot to people. Listen to them. Don't just keep rambling on, but take time to listen to what others are saying. Eye contact. Look them in the eye. Don't be afraid to, just look at them. Like I said, nothing screams more than when you're like, oh yeah, hey, how you doing? And they're playing in their phone. But when you look up and you catch their eyes, they're listening. Smile. Many times just a smile and a wave, saying hi to somebody means a lot to people. We can take that for granted. Even if they're walking down, sometimes they may be walking down like this, and sometimes if you just say, hey, and they look up and you're smiling, that might change their day. And then hold the door. Hold the door. That's a good one. That speaks so much to people. We can take that one for granted. Just hold the door. And sometimes you may have to hold it for a couple of seconds, like I said last week. I have a couple second time limit, that I'll hold the door, But if you see someone coming and you take that extra effort to pull the door open and let them go in first, it means a lot to people. So in thinking of that, we're going to move on because we're going to flip it this morning. I found this quote from Michelle Tafoya. If you don't know who she is, she's a sports reporter. But she said this on Twitter, and I just got a kick out. I sent it to Bethany, and I said, you got to check this out. She said this: "It's so exciting. My son turned 14, and now he knows everything. Everything. I don't have to tell him anything anymore because he already knows. In fact, he knows more than I do and more than his dad does. We couldn't be more thrilled. What a joyous time." I just got a kick out of that because I was like, we're going to have a 14-year-old boy here soon. And sometimes I feel like I'm a dumb dad, like I don't know anything. But this is what happens, when we think about the youth and the young. We think of just attitudes and they know everything. And many times we begin to look down on them. And in thinking of that, last Sunday, a whole group of people, there were 9 in all, went down in a helicopter crash in California. And one of them just happened to be Kobe Bryant, who was an NBA legend. He'll be a Hall of Famer eventually here. But I bring him up because as he graduated in 96, the same year I graduated high school, and he went straight to the NBA. I went to college. But he went straight to the NBA. And as he went to the NBA, if you heard any of the interviews that he had as an 18-year-old, he had a vision and a direction for his life. Like you would think listening to him like he was a whole lot older than 18. And some of the problem was when he got into the league, he had this vision and where he wanted to get to, and it rubbed a lot of the older guys the wrong way. And so they looked down on him like, what, this kid's, arrogant. He's 18. What is he coming in? And eventually, a lot of people began to hate him. And, he termed the phrase Mamba mentality because they called him the Black Mamba. But it was his way of dealing with all of this because he already had a vision and he was like, I got to stay focused. He put it like this. He said, this is Mamba mentality. If I have to wrestle a bear, pray for the bear. He's like, you gotta fight and you gotta know where you're going and you gotta stay focused and just keep pushing that way. And so he had this attitude. And as an 18-year-old kid and 19 and 20, as he began to develop and become the player who he was, a lot of people looked down on him because of this attitude that he had. But it wasn't because he didn't respect them. It was because he knew what he needed to do to get where he wanted to go. And he wanted to go down as a legend. He wanted to go down as one of the greatest players to play the game. And he did. He did. And so when we think of all of those things this morning, we want to take a look at that. And the scripture that I want to start off with is 1 Timothy 4:12. It says this: "Don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity." Now this is Paul. Paul's writing this letter to Timothy. And Timothy had gone out to help build these churches up, to pastor these churches. But he wasn't a very old person. He was still a young person as he's going out. So Paul is encouraging him and telling him, don't let anyone think less of you. And so my main idea as we continue on here is this: the future is in the youth. The future is in the youth. I just want us to be thinking about that and wrap our minds around that, because this is hard for us. We only see the problems that the youth have, and we forget that they're still the future. And a lot of times, well, not all, a lot of times, all of the times, they're a product of those who are older. Huh? We get mad at the youth, but they're a product of those who have paved the way. So, as we move forward here, my first point in thinking the future is in the youth, I'm just going to tear this scripture apart, 1 Timothy 4:12. So point number one is this: don't think less of youth. Don't think less of youth. You know, this is what ends up happening. We begin to look down our nose at youth. We begin to look at them as they're not good enough, or they don't know enough. And that word less, in some scriptures, they use the word despise, but it also has this meaning in the Greek. It means to condemn or disdain or think little or nothing of. You know, many times we look at the young people as they're growing, and we have disdain for them. And many times maybe it's because they're accomplishing things that we didn't accomplish when we were their age. The opportunities that young people have today, many of us wish in some regards we were young because of the opportunities they have. The things they have, the things they can experience. You know, I think of when I grew up, and I think of when my kids are growing up, and they've already done more things than I ever did at their age. Think about that. There are far more opportunities for them, but many times it creates just a frustration in the older ones, and so we look down on the youth. I remember growing up in the church, and when we were when we were still New Covenant Fellowship, we met up in Kittanning. And I remember being a kid, and you'd run around and try to slide down the rail outside of the church and do all that, what kids do. And I remember certain people, you know, that would just like it was when you saw them coming, you knew you were in trouble. It was like suck the fun right out of being at church, you know. Like, don't you know we're in church building? Don't run around and don't do this and don't do that. And it was like, what do you want me to do? I'm young. And I'm not saying that we should have had that disrespect and not listen, but sometimes there's a time where when we were outside and we're just kind of sliding down the rails and stuff, that it's like, okay, just leave it alone. They're outside. I understand inside, you know, there's people. We don't want to knock people over. We're not trying to play tackle football in the lobby. But there's a time where, you know, it's like, hey, maybe I should try to slide down the rail too. But we look down with disdain. And as I did some study, and even in this regard, the word youth in the ancient Greek was used of grown-up military age, extending to the 40th year. So Timothy is somewhere between the age of 30 and 40 years old, and people are still looking down on him. And so when you think about those to our right and our left, we got some 20 and 30-somethings right here in our church. Even younger than that, we have right here, right now, sitting in our midst. And many times we look down on them. I shared a little bit about this last week, and I said we want to reach the next generation, and so we get 50 and 60-somethings to sit around a table and say, how do we want to reach the community and our next generation? Meanwhile, we don't want to use a cell phone. We don't like this, we don't like that, but we want to know how to reach the next generation, and we're going to sit around. If we're going to reach the next generation, we're going to have to start asking the next generation, how are we going to reach you guys? What means something to you? We got to gain understanding and proper perspective, and the only way you can do that is by acknowledging that they know things of how to reach their peer group, and we need to find out what it is. This is the hard part to wrap our minds around, because we want to just sit around and look down. No, we're going to tell you how we're going to reach you. And meanwhile, there's less and less young people coming through the church doors worldwide. We get mad at cell phones, but do you know where do cell phones come from? The devil. The cell phones came from those who paved the way. But yeah, possibly, the devil, he threw those. I'll give the devil a name here if you really want to know. In 1946, actually, is when cell phones started being worked on by AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph Company, if you didn't know what AT&T stood for. American Telephone and Telegraph Company. They introduced mobile telephones. But Motorola, they did not want to be upstaged. And so they had a man named Martin Cooper go to work to develop a cell phone for Motorola. And in 1973, Martin Cooper called Joel Engel, who was the head of AT&T's project, from a New York City street to make sure his cell phone worked. So Motorola called AT&T and said, yeah, I'm calling you from a cell phone. Just wanted to let you know, I think we beat you. But that was in 1973. We think cell phones came around in the 90s or the 2000s, from some young person. It came around from those who paved the way. Why? Because people didn't want to leave well enough alone. And that's not a bad thing. It's who we are. We experiment. We try to make things better, How many of us, you don't think about how do we do this better? How do I make this better? How do I do... We're always tinkering with what can we do to make things better? And so when we work on these things, then the technology comes out, and then some of it was they had to wait for other technology to be built so they could... And pretty soon someone tinkered with something else, and someone tinkered with something else, and then it allowed this to come together, and boom. Now we have a cell phone. Now we have an iPad. The preacher can preach from. I don't need to have paper. Because we didn't leave well enough alone, and it's all right. But then we get upset at how people respond to the technology. But it was our fault. We look down our nose, but we don't realize that it came from us. And we're teaching our kids, we tell them, well, how can you make something better? If you can think of a way to make something better. And we put that into our kids, so kids are growing up. How do I make something better? How do I do this? How do I do that? And they're creating, and they're making new things, and things are developing. And then when that happens, we look down our nose at them. Cell phones, they're of the devil. They're evil. It's just because some of them, we're just... As a culture, we just abuse everything that we have. So we have technology, and then we just get sucked right into it. We get a phone, and we're like, I got to know what's happening. I get on Facebook, I'm like, what's Bob Gill doing today? What's Caitlin saying? What did she say? Has she posted in the last hour? Phil, what's Rent the Chicken doing today? I know I just checked Facebook 5 minutes ago, but maybe Billy updated her status and I don't want to miss maybe something she posted. And so we take what good things can be with technology and we abuse it because we just can't put it down. And then our kids grab it and we just look down on them. But we don't want to look down on them. They're the future of the church. They're the future. And they need us to teach them and speak life into them. And yeah, sometimes they need told, don't run in the church. Don't put holes in the wall. Don't throw the ball. I needed all of those. I still... Shh. I'm learning my lesson. I'm learning there's a squirrel that's been crawling in our house and getting in our garage, and it's just driving me bonkers, and I'm trying to shoot it with a BB gun. But it stays in the neighbor's yard because the neighbor's yard has bird seed, and I'm like, I want to shoot it there, but their cars are out, so I'm like, I can't shoot it. As much as I want to, and it's in me that I can hit it, I'm not going to hit nothing else. If it's me, I'm going to end up bouncing it off of it, and it's going to hit the car and leave a big ding or something, and then I'm going to be like, I knew that was going to happen. Why did I just not leave it alone? You know, so sometimes, I still need, Craig, don't do that. But at the same time, sometimes you need to hear, that's a good idea. That's a great idea. That was a great shot. You know? And these young people, that's what they need. Timothy needed that. And he needed to be confident in himself that he had a call in his life from God and that he had been put there for a reason. And not to let what others thought of him dictate how he reacted and how he behaved. And that's the hard part. That was what Kobe Bryant had to do. Even though people were looking down on him, he had to have that Mamba mentality that said, here's where I'm trying to get to, and I can't let you prevent that. I mean, this guy, it all comes out after the fact, which is sad, but this guy had everything, like, situated. He had the helicopter. Some of you maybe don't know why he rode in helicopters. It was because of this. He would go to work at LA and he'd get his basketball stuff and get his shots up, get his treatment. And then it would take about 40 minutes to drive home, and sometimes even worse because it's LA, traffic. And so he had a family. And he'd want to get home for his family. And he said one day, I think he got stuck in traffic and he missed a play. And that was devastating to him. And so he began looking into ways that he could get home faster. A helicopter, 15 minutes. Up, down, he's home. And he was like, I could be up, down. He could go get his kids from school, which was important to him. His wife's like, I can get him. He's like, I want to be the dad that gets my kids. And so that's why he had a helicopter. That's what he used it for, to make sure he was there for his kids. He never missed anything. It was all about his family. And so he had this plan. And he executed it. Even though people looked down on him, he knew who he was and where he wanted to get to. And this is what Paul's saying to Timothy. Don't let them look down on you. People are going to look down. 1 Peter 5:5 says this, likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Many times that's where we stop. We're like, young people, you have to submit yourself to your elders. 1 Peter 5:5, I'm reading from the New King James Version. But then it goes on to say this, yes, all of you be submissive to one another and be clothed with humility, for God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Peter goes on to say, all of you be submissive to one another. Olin Holderby, I was doing some study, he says this in an article entitled The Relationship of Young People and Their Elders. In the physical realm, there are, as normally expressed, 5 age groups: infancy, childhood, adolescence, maturity, and old age. However, in the spiritual realm, there are only 2 groups: babes in Christ and mature Christians. So when we come into the church, there's only those who are new in the faith and those who are old in the faith. And we all have something to offer if we're willing to submit to one another. Then this verse goes on. And Paul didn't just say, to Timothy about not letting others look down and that we older people need to not look down on the young. But he goes on to tell the young people, to tell Timothy what he can do. He says this, and this is my second point. Number 2, be an example. Be an example. He tells Timothy, you got to be an example. Don't run your mouth. Learn when to speak and when not to. We see that in the book of Job. You see Job's 3 friends, they keep talking and saying and doing all of that stuff that they were doing, confronting Job. And then he has a 4th friend, and the 4th guy starts out. What's he say? He starts out by saying, I waited my turn because I'm young, but I don't hear any wisdom coming from you older ones. So now I want to speak. That's paraphrased. That's my version. But then he speaks, and at the end of that, God just tells Job, pray for your 3 friends. Doesn't make any mention of the 4th one. So there might have been something the 4th one said that was good. But he waited his turn because he was young. He was an example. Be an example. John Calvin said this, thus we learn how foolish and ridiculous it is for people to complain that they receive no honor when in fact there is nothing about them that is worth honoring. But rather they expose themselves to contempt by their ignorance, the example of their impure lives, their light-mindedness, and other faults. The only way to win respect is by outstanding virtues which will protect us against contempt. And even that's going to get you looked down upon. Even when you are an example. Sometimes you might hear you're a goody-goody, or brown-noser. Because you're trying to be an example of hard work. People are like, hey, we don't work that hard here. Just calm down, bring it down a little bit. Boss will expect this every day. And then what happens? We just kind of go downhill. And then when we're like, well, hey, I want honored. Well, why should I honor you? You haven't went above and beyond. You weren't an example. 1 Timothy 5:1, I brought out the first part of this last week. Never speak harshly to an older man, but appeal to him respectfully as you would to your own father. But then it says, talk to younger men as you would to your own brothers. There's a respect factor of how we talk to the young people. Like your own brother. Not like they're inferior. Because they're learning, they're growing, and there are things that we can speak into them, but there are also things we can glean from them. And Paul goes on to tell Timothy, be an example. And he tells him how to be, or what to be an example in. He says this, with your words. With your words. Point A, with your words. Matthew 12:36, and I tell you this, you must give an account on Judgment Day for every idle word you speak. We're going to have to give an account for every word we speak. So we want to be an example in our words. Even sometimes when we might want to yell at somebody because they're not listening to us, sometimes we just have to, I'm just going to keep this to myself. And that means not tweeting it or putting it on Facebook, posting an angry Instagram. And James 1:19, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. This is when you can start showing maturity and when honor comes. You're slow to speak. That's usually the first thing you know whenever somebody's hitting those teen years. They're really fast to speak. You tell them one thing and they got all these comebacks, you know. I'm like, give me time out. I need to go in the other room and think of all my responses. You know, my mind ain't working that fast. Those of you who don't have teens, I'm just giving you a little peek of what's coming. Be an example in your words. Be an example and be with your actions. With your actions. John Bloom, in an article titled, What is Your Doing Saying?, says this: your actions speak. Your works are words. The question is, what are they saying? Your actions speak. Your works are words. What you are doing is speaking louder than what you're saying. This is the hard part. You know, growing up, I'd hear people say, do as I say, not as I do, you know, kind of a thing. It's like, huh? Your actions are speaking louder than your words. I don't know if I want to listen to you at all. This is the struggle that we have. Many times we want to say, I'm a Christian, but is my life really reflecting that? Am I doing the right things that would say I'm a Christian? Matthew 5:38-40 says this: you have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. Maybe you never have thought of it like this, but it says the right cheek. How do I smack somebody on the right cheek if I'm right-handed? A big old backhand. I can't just do this. It's a big old backhand. And when you backhanded somebody, that was a sign of extreme offense. If you just smack somebody with the palm, they said in Jewish law, you would be fined like 200, they used the word zuzim, but it was the same, about 200 denarii. But if you slapped someone with a backhand, that was 400. It was double the offense. So it was double the punishment. And so when he says about turning the other cheek, it wasn't a sign of like, let's just get beat up all the time. It was a sign of saying, I'm not going to hold this against you and look for my revenge and take the $400. It was more like, I'm going to overlook this offense. Be an example in your actions. If we can overlook offenses when they come our way, young people, older people, what does that speak to everyone around us? Yeah, we have the right to do this or do that. But if we can overlook it, how much better would the world be? John 10:24-25, Jesus says this: the people surrounded him and asked, how long are you going to keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly. And Jesus replied, I have already told you, and you don't believe me. Here's the kicker: the proof is the work I do in my Father's name. He already told them by his actions. He was saying, my actions are proving who I am. People are being healed. Lives are being set free. It speaks for itself. My actions. So if you don't believe that, are you going to believe anything that comes out of my mouth? Be an example in your actions. With your love. C, point C. Be an example with your love. How do you love? How do you love? You only love when things are going your way? Or are you looking to love all the time? Luke 6 says this in verses 32 to 33. If you love only those who love you, why should you get credit for that? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good only to those who do good to you, why should you get credit? Even sinners do that much. Now jump down to verse 35. Love your enemies, do good to them. And then verse 36. You must be compassionate just as your Father is compassionate. Sinners love other sinners. That's easy. I'm calling you to love everyone. Everyone. The atheist that makes fun of you, love them. The Muslim who maybe gives you the heebie-jeebies or something. I don't know. Love them. The person struggling with identity issues. Love them. We're supposed to be an example. John 13:35. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. When we're able to put this into practice within the church, people will see this person really does love God. Think of that. If the world would actually see us turn the other cheek when somebody offends us and we can go for ours, they saw us turn the other cheek and say, hey, what's a backhand to my right cheek between us? I still love you. And then when I look in the mirror and I see the knuckle prints and the black and blue mark, it's, God, this is in your hands. I want to love. I want to be an example. Help me not to want to take it out on them. And it can be easy. It can be easy. 1 John 3:18. Dear children, let's not merely say that we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions. So be an example with your love. D, with your faith. With your faith. Hebrews 11:1. Faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Sometimes we need to be an example by just believing that God is who he says he is, even when things are crashing all around us. Like I shared last week, just what we were going through as a family, as a couple, and trying to figure out where we are. We're reading the story, and it's like you get to that climax where you fell off the edge of the cliff, and you're like, what's the next page? And there is no next page yet because God hasn't written it out. And so you're stuck there. And it would be easy to throw in the towel. But then what kind of an example of faith would that be for all to see that, hey, God has a plan, and even though I don't know what's coming, I'm going to hold the book and wait. What are you doing next, God? And I'm going to be an example of faith for others. It can be easy when it all is just turning out all hunky-dory. I'm really throwing out some crazy terms today, I guess. That Western PA dialect. When it all goes well, it can be easy to have faith. But when things start falling apart around us, now where's our faith? We go to work and we tell people, I love Jesus, I have faith, he's so good to me. And then when things fall apart, we're in there complaining to the same people. And they're saying, what kind of faith is this? And do I really want this? Stephen Furtick said this. I found someone posted this on Facebook, but it was a quote from Pastor Stephen Furtick. He says this: faith is a focus. Faith is the ability to say, I'm putting my eyes on the goodness of God in this moment. I'm not looking back. I'm not looking around. My mind has already reached a conclusion. God is for me. God is with me, because my faith is focused on the Word of God that I'm walking toward. That's faith. I'm just focused that God is for me. I'm not looking back. I'm not looking around. You know? Well, God, what about that person? Why do they always seem to get everything and I don't? I'm not looking around. God is for me. I'm just focused on Him. Be an example with your faith. And my last one, E, with your purity. With your purity, how you live. When you say no to the sexual sin that comes your way, you're being an example for others. When you say no, I'm waiting till I'm married, you're an example. You know, when you see that nowadays, when somebody comes out and says they're a virgin, you see all the people saying, you know, I'm trying to take it back. Like, I should have never said this. Why? Because they get hassled. I remember I was in college. I told people, you know, I'd never kissed a girl, and I got hassled at a Christian college. Like, what? You've never kissed a girl? Yeah. I didn't want to. I didn't find the right one yet. What do you want me to say? But then when that pressure comes, we give in to it. And then we want to say like, oh, you know, I was only kidding. When you find the right person, whether you're married or not, you know, go for it. And you're like, you hear these people say that, and you're like, wait, what happened? That's not what you were saying here. They got pressured because they weren't like others. And it's all right when we make mistakes, because God can forgive and He can heal and He can set us free. But for those who have made a choice from a younger age and are moving up, let's not look down on them because they made that choice. Let's celebrate that fact. That they want to be an example with their purity. 1 Peter 2:12. Be careful to live properly among your unbelieving neighbors. Then even if they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your honorable behavior and they will give honor to God when He judges the world. They'll see your honorable behavior. Philippians 1:9-11, and I end with this scripture. I pray, this is Paul saying, I pray that your love will overflow more and more, and that you will keep on growing in knowledge and understanding. For I want you to understand what really matters, so that you may live pure and blameless lives until the day of Christ's return. May you always be filled with the fruit of your salvation, the righteous character produced in your life by Jesus Christ. For this will bring much glory and praise to God. Be an example in your purity. It's a good thing. Teach your kids about it. So let's not look down our nose at the young people. And young people, let's set an example. Someday, young people, we're going to be the old people. And if we get this in our heads now, we can set a good example then when we're older, and we won't look down on the young because we know what it's like. Let's not forget that. We know what it's like. But we also need That parent, this is where we get in trouble sometimes. Parents, we're like, oh, I don't want to look down on my kids. The kid still needs discipline. The kid still needs structure. So they grow up the right way. Otherwise, they'll grow up all chaotic, crazy, undisciplined. And then we're sending them into the workforce, and they're like, why do I need to work? Mom and Dad will pay for everything. I had that thought when I graduated college and I moved back home, and I was like, Mom and Dad, I'm going to live here for a little bit. And my dad said, you're going to pay rent? I said, what? I'm your son. What am I paying rent for? Because he was, that. He's like, your mom and I need new cars. No, I'm just kidding. He's like, because you got to learn. It's not a free ride in the world. Nobody else is going to give you an apartment and say, hey, yours. Live in it as long as you like. I don't need the money. And so he taught me how to budget. And it's a good thing. So that I could be an example and grow up and teach my kids, hey, you got to pay the bills. You got to set a budget. Money doesn't grow on a tree in the backyard. Too bad. But let's all stand.